You're good to go.
Thanks. Welcome everybody to the December meeting of the Manhattan Community Board 1 Transportation and Street Activity Permit Committee. Want to go to the next slide? You can see the agenda tonight. It's been moved around a little bit in that we're going to start with the street use priorities because Jennifer Leung is here from the DOT in case we have any questions, and then we'll go back and proceed according to this agenda. Joining me is Lucian Reynolds, the district manager, who will be running some of the controls, and Michael Francoeur, the co-chair, who's also going to be taking on the first topic of tonight, which is going to be the street use priorities. So I'm going to turn this over to Michael.
Great. So I am going to actually shift screens to show the Google Doc that we were working in last time. So let me see if that...
Oh, Michael, I just wanted to tell people, yes, when there are discussions, we will start with community board members and then it will be open to community members. So please be patient. We will get, because we do want to hear from everybody. Thank you.
Yes, great point, great point.
And before you walk in, Michael, and while we have Jennifer, I just want to make an announcement to everyone, or just ask Jennifer, the one Michael's done. Jennifer, if you would remind everyone about the Chinatown, the Gateways to Chinatown meeting tomorrow. I'll be putting a link in for the flyer for everyone. If you want to click on the link, you can see the flyer for more information. But just wanted to get that out there while we're probably at maximum attendance and while we have Jennifer here. Sorry about that, Michael. You go ahead.
No, you're good. Actually, while I've got this, let me just send out the link to you, Lucian, so that you could share it in the chat if anyone wants to tag along. Let me see if I can find my chat window. There's chat. Cool. So I just sent that to you, Lucian. So to give everyone a little overview of what we were talking about at last month's committee meeting, we broached this topic, and this again is probably just going to stick to being a discussion further down the line. And if we have alignment on some of these issues, it might turn into a resolution. But that's kind of the arc of this I guess brainstorm. So last month we started having a conversation, which was prompted by all of the changes that have happened over the past 8 or 9 months in New York City, in which we've seen many unprecedented changes in the use of our streets, from restaurants to open streets for exercise and commerce. And DOT is taking all of these programs that were enacted very quickly and without a lot of community board input, and they'll be working on finalizing that. And there's been a lot of different pressures from business interests, from communities, from the city council to extend these temporary programs and make them more permanent. And given that process is occurring, we wanted to make sure that as a community board, we start having a discussion about what our input is, what our priorities are, what our guiding principles would be, so that we can get ahead of some of the discussions that are going to happen as DOT is working to finalize these programs and provide them with input ahead of time as to, hey, this is what our community board really prioritizes and really wants to see. This is what's working and this is what might not be working. And so what I'm going to do is we kind of had a pretty unstructured conversation about it at last committee meeting, and we just kind of went through some priorities off the top of people's heads, some bullet points. So I'm going to go through these and provide a really quick overview of what we talked about. I did provide the link to everyone in email and everyone should have been able to go in and edit this page. There wasn't too many edits after following our committee meeting last month, but so that I wanted to give everyone an opportunity also to see if anyone has any additional thoughts. Once we do that, then I was thinking that we should go through and see if any of these bullet points fit into broader categories that we could kind of group them into, since I'm getting the sense that the best way to present these priorities is at a more higher general level rather than being super specific. But we'll do that again after if we have alignment on any of these. So I'll start and talk through a little bit of what we talked about last time. And a few things that came up were freight and deliveries were a big one. We see it all throughout our district, a lot of double parking, a lot of what seems to be either a lack of enough delivery zones, or the fact that placard parking is blocking delivery zones for businesses and the major freight companies like FedEx, UPS, and UPS. And we see there's like one great example. There's like a Fresh Direct truck that's always parked on Liberty Street over by Maiden Lane that seems to have like a 24-hour distribution center and a no standing zone. So that's there's also a lot of FedEx and UPS trucks that often park on the sidewalk, blocking the sidewalk because they can't seem to find any parking. So that was an issue that's come up, and it was also actually prompted because we had a few discussions about the cargo bikes over the last few months. Another one I hinted at just there was placard parking and finding ways to reduce municipal curbside parking since that's come to dominate the curbside use in our district. Another one is, sanitation and curbside trash. We had talked about this a little bit. I think it was at the beginning of this year, though that seems so long ago, in which the Department of Sanitation announced that it would have a Clean Curbs pilot program. Actually, I wonder if this link shows an image. It doesn't show an image, but the idea was that they wanted to start a pilot program in which they would create start putting containers on the curbs for businesses and residences to use to throw their trash out instead of throwing them on the sidewalk. Another thing that came up was actually prompted by the discussion that we had about Edgar Street or Trinity Place, Edgar Street, in which there's the new school going in there. We had started having a discussion about making sure that, or a priority seemed to be coming out of that discussion was we want to make sure that there's safe drop off and pickup areas for school kids. I wrote as a question as to whether or not there's demand around schools for additional play space or areas, especially given COVID-19. We also had we started talking about, it's impossible to talk about transportation without talking about congestion pricing and congestion in general, asking what our stance on congestion pricing is. There's, I guess, in terms of regarding some of the programs that DOT has in place right now, there's the current open streets programs. And so I think I'd like to pose the question to the committee. How do we feel about those programs? We know that they've been implemented for many restaurants. It's been a lifeline, but have they been working well for the residents? Yes or no? Do we like these programs? Would we advocate for them continuing or even being permanent? Those are all questions that I think that we can have and maybe not get too into the weeds of, because that would kind of involve maybe a discussion with the licensing committee about the processes for obtaining those licenses, but it's something that should be on the table for us to talk about. But this is one that I added related to security zones. This came up when we were talking about the closure of that street in front of the new school over on Trinity Place, or Greenwich Street and Trinity Place. And a possible solution to closing down the westbound side of Edgar Street would be allowing traffic on Liberty Street, but currently that's not allowed because it's within the, the envelope of the World Trade Center, which is a security zone. And we have a number of security zones in our district around the World Trade Center, around the Wall Street Stock Exchange area, and around One Police Plaza. And so I just wanted to throw that out there as something that at least I've been thinking about, because that does represent a pretty significant chunk of space in our district that's not as open to the public as other areas. Another thing that's come up, it will come up tonight and has come up in past sessions, is how do we feel about shared transportation, bike shares, mopeds, and car share. It does seem like these private-public partnerships are a big, or at least here to stay for the short term, perhaps the long term, in these partnerships with DOT. And a lot of these, like city bike stations, do require public space, public curbside space. And we actually had a conversation about that last month, and I wanted to actually show everyone, this was the resolution that was voted on. Gosh, was it a week ago? 2 weeks ago? 1 week ago at full board, but it came out of executive. And this was about the 4 sites that DOT and City Bike had come to us to talk about. And we ended up supporting the expansion into 2 non-controversial locations, but also when the therefore be it resolves were a few points that I think are good examples of what we could come out of these priority discussions with. One of them is, that we believe in putting pedestrians first and request that new docks go on the road beds, versus the sidewalks, especially when it comes to historic sidewalks like in the Tribeca district. Another would be avoiding docks blocking sidewalks or street space that existing restaurants are using for the open restaurants program. Another is, hey, we should be putting bike lanes on streets with city bike docks and increasing education around city bike. And so some of the things that you see right away here are things like, prioritizing pedestrians, making sure that we are not obstructing sidewalks, making sure that we're, supporting our local businesses, and making sure that we're ensuring safety both for cyclists and pedestrians. So those are just a few examples that made their way into a past resolution that I think honestly would fit well into this discussion we're having right now. I'll go through the remainder really quickly. So another one was pedestrian curbside and drop-off locations. Like for hotels and residences, making sure that there's space in front of those, high traffic areas, such that residents or visitors can get in and out easily. Kind of what I was just speaking to was, it seems like a priority in some of our past conversations has been reducing obstructions on sidewalk, making sure that residents can get around and pedestrians can get around. A few things are like scaffolding, delivery trucks parking, bicycle parking. So these were just what we had right now. So I wanted to pause and see if anyone had strong opinions about any of these or had some things that we missed. And I'll also I know people are here for other discussion items, so I'll keep a track of the time and not let this discussion go too long. So we're at 6:20 right now. So I'll stop there. Any thoughts, anybody? And Betty, feel free to weigh in as well.
Some hands are up.
Oh, sorry, I see hands. It's been a month or a week out of these meetings, and I forgot how they work. So I see Mark Amoruzzo's hand up, and then I see Patrick's hand up. So we'll go in that order.
All right. So the point that I brought up last month that was supposed to be included in this is missing, and it was regards to parking regulations, and we had a vote on this in. Before the virus, with regards to a committee vote to have this on the agenda, but I understand it's been busy, and we're working remotely. It's a little more harder. But the gist of it is that I guess the language would be change current parking curbside regulations where appropriate to comport with the current residential and business needs. So as an example, in my neighborhood in Tribeca, there's still a number of streets that are a throwback to when it was a light industrial neighborhood. There's a lot of no parking 8 to 6, and there's no parking any times on streets that should absolutely be, I would say, as mostly, being, in line with other streets and air that are similar, alternate side parking, and then also partly truck parking as well, a section of the street or a whole street or whatever the case. And that's something that's easily, like I mentioned last time, Community Board 2 has things like this in their agenda every month. Change this to that, change whatever to whatever. So we really need to start hammering those out in every neighborhood, and all of us know our neighborhoods and what would be best for the neighborhood. And I think we need to start working on that. And speaking with DOT, and Jennifer, maybe you can chime in on this. Over the years, is that they're very amenable to changing regulations when we request it. Of course, they're going to look into it. If there's an issue, they'll let us know. But generally, it's not I found a big deal to change something if it makes sense. So if we can add that language that I mentioned, change curbside parking regulations to comport with current needs of residents and businesses.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I just put this here and we can have a conversation about that. I wonder if that also, do you think that we could squeeze or that would fit well with placard parking? I know we've had discussions about how, no, you think that's different?
That should be its own, that's its own issue. Placard parking, it's its own issue, and this is its own thing as well. They shouldn't be combined, I don't think.
Okay, sure. No, that's fair.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
So
Patrick, what's your next?
That'll be added to the resolution?
Yes, so I've got it here. We're right now just talking about a discussion, and so I think once we finish having discussion about all these points, I'd love to get everyone's take on how they kind of fit into broader buckets and if we want to pick any of those that are going to become part of our resolution. So
is this resolution, as we're looking at it now, going to be voted on?
Not tonight, no, and it's not going to look like this. This is just a kind of word vomit on a Google Doc right now with some ideas.
All right, so then there's no reason not to add the sentence I said, right?
Yeah, for sure. Does this capture it or no? Changing curbside regulations to fit better with district needs?
Yeah, basically to comport with the needs, the current needs of the residents and businesses.
Yeah, sure. Yep,
okay, thank you.
That down.
Right, okay. But that's not a priority use.
Why not?
Because that has to reflect the priorities that haven't been decided yet.
It hasn't been decided. It's the regulations, or the regulations are what they shouldn't be.
Well, we don't know that yet.
You do know that. If you live in the neighborhood, you know that you have no parking any time on a street that shouldn't be, that there's no reason to have that. Then it's obvious. It's self-evident.
Yeah, I guess I think what Betty might be trying to get at is, are there any specific, so you mentioned changing regulations. Do you think one of the things is more or less truck parking, more or less residential parking?
Well, if you want to I just wanted to give a broad stroke on it to be simple. If you really want to get into the details on it, I can spend another half hour talking about it. But I just thought that my one little sentence there would just be a shot across the bow to start getting into details later.
Sure. No, I think that's totally fair.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Okay.
Patrick, I see you, and then I see Brittany's hand up after you. So if you want to go after Brittany.
Thanks, guys. 2 quick points. So one is actually building off of what Mark said, and I'll throw in a specific sort of use priority and regulation that I think would work. And I think what Mark is really getting at, and is something that people have been struggling with for a long time, is how do we manage all these different priorities and uses among different times, right? So sometimes commercial loading and truck parking makes sense for a particular part of the day. Sometimes residential unloading does. So anyway, to my 2 quick points. One is residential unloading. It's a little different than just drop off and pick up. It's something I've noticed, particularly since the pandemic, that we have a lot of people, maybe it's just people are owning more cars, I'm not sure what it is. People are getting more deliveries or living at home. But I see people with a need to park in front of their building for up to about 15 minutes or so to be able to unload groceries, unload stuff that they just went and got at Costco, et cetera. And them being unable to do it, and I could say particularly, for example, on John Street where I live, you see a lot of congestion and backup because that option doesn't exist for them. So I would add that under, I think it was the second to last bullet point about residential drop-offs. And I think you could just expand that from drop-offs to be something a little bit more around loading and unloading short term. So 15-minute regulations, for example. Second point,
sure.
And it's really, I know we touch a little bit on construction, but to drill down on it is more of a sensible way that we manage DOT construction permits. Jennifer probably knows exactly what I'm getting at, given some recent complaints. But we have a situation, for example, on John Street where the owner of the building of 110 William Street constantly has their demo hauling truck in front of 2 residential building entrances, which environmentally makes 0 sense. And particularly the last permit that this company has, they're hauling from literally around the corner. Their dumpsters have to be rolled from hundreds of feet away in order to meet the truck that's sitting for no reason in front of two residential entrances. So prioritizing where those DOT construction permits are in a way that makes sense with the other uses that are going on. Again, coming back to the broader point, I think Mark was trying to make this. It's just really about how we manage all of those uses at the same time. Thanks.
Sure. No, those are great.
Michael, if I could just chime in, I think just to round that out, I think also exploring what the current New York City law is that forces DOT to have to give those permits for very little money. So I'm hearing that these the demo jobs, construction jobs are taking street space, but paying almost nothing compared to the value that it actually represents to the community in terms of moving people and goods and services through the district, that they're paying almost nothing, and so they're acting like it has no value by not effectively using it. And so if the law was changed so DOT could charge them the actual, sorry, you hear my son, charge the actual value of the street space that they're taking up, perhaps they would be more efficient with it.
Oh, yeah, more efficient use of that street space. That's a great comment, Lucian. Cool. And I saw Brittany had her hand up after Patrick. Yeah,
Yes,
so if you want to go ahead. Hey,
Thanks,
Brittany.
Michael. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. So the point I was going to make was under the business sub-bullet.
Yeah.
So I personally actually do really like the Open Streets program. I think it's actually quite beneficial from a pedestrian standpoint. However, the only, I think, drawback, and I think where there's room for improvement, is around communication. When I've been biking in the district or even in a car, sometimes streets are just closed, and obviously you don't know that till you get down the street. And I think that makes it a lot more difficult for people to navigate around the area without having some advanced heads up. And obviously different streets have different times that they're closed versus others. So if there was a way to have more of a synchronized and streamlined way to communicate, when certain streets are going to be closed, if at all, I think that would be helpful to not only pedestrians, but also people that are driving or cycling or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. That's a great point. Cool. And I see, Mariama, you've got your hand up too.
Hi, thank you, Michael. This may go to Mark's point, but there's some streets that seemingly, at least, have some nonsensical parking rules. I mean, there may be very good reason, but for example, like Maiden Lane, between Water and Gold, I don't know. You can't park there until like 10 o'clock. Now, I park inside, but I notice these things, and I feel for my neighbors. Nothing's over there. I can't imagine why. Nothing's over there but residences, after business hours. So I cannot imagine why they would be charging. And it seems, like I said, there may be very good reason, but it seems that they're just maybe taking advantage of, what they feel the financial aptitude of the neighborhood is. And that's, it's unfair. It's insulting. I actually I won't mention the restaurant because I want to continue to support. And I had a complaint. I called them directly. I didn't want to complain about them publicly. But I got a burger. It was $19.60. Altogether, I paid $25 for the burger because I like to tip the people and stuff too, particularly, these days. And it was like a pre-made patty that was rancid, basically. And so when I called, guy says, oh, well, the prices are like for the neighborhood, but you still have to have good stuff. And I feel the same way about, these public services, and maybe more so, because that's our tax dollars as well, in addition to, something like a parking meter that has to be fed, that you're paying more money.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I wonder, so Mariam, do you think that would fit in as, I think you're right, it kind of fits in with what Mark and Patrick were saying, and possibly even more to the point where there are some parking rules that maybe are remnants from when they maybe made sense in the past, but the neighborhood's
Right.
changed, especially now with COVID, things have changed, and it might be time to revisit, a bunch and maybe even look specifically at some of these parking rules. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mariama. Tammy, I see with your hand up. Patrick, I also see with you still with your hand up. Did you have something else to add after Tammy? I'll go to you after Tammy.
No, let Patrick finish first. I'd always like to hear
sure.
from the community.
No,
So I'll go
I gotta
last.
take my hand down. I gotta take my hand down.
Okay,
Go, Tammy.
all good. The floor is yours, Tammy.
So I apologize for being late. I actually had a work call that went late, which was delightful difference from this. But it does make me come back to conversations that we have had about old remnants, new usage, and really one of the striking things that has dawned on me, there's been a ton of usage change on the streets, not only in FIDI, but kind of all over. I'm going to use, I think Lucian knows where I'm going. I'm going to use the area right by Washington Market, right just north of where we have the weekend market, the farmers market. There used to be a supermarket there, and the parking was designated specifically for it being a supermarket. The developer who bought that building and now operates it, there's a private club there, for kids club. It is no longer a market, so it doesn't need the food deliveries. It doesn't need the rest of it. And yet we look and have the rules have not changed. The parking hasn't changed. It's an ideal location for other usages, potentially, and the parking could change and provide relief to the area in different ways. And I'm wondering, there doesn't seem to be, that I have seen as of yet, any mechanism that I know of to be able to report that, request that, kind of figure that out. And yet it does seem that the agencies have a way to request parking on specific streets. So if an agency moves in, and we've approved numerous city agencies moving around our district, renting new space, that's come before our board, and they apply to DOT for street side, agency parking, one of the things that drives me nuts. And yet, if they move, what does that parking end up being? Again, so I'm kind of wondering if there's a mechanism, a form, a request file, something that's easier for people to be able to funnel that. And if our goal is to reduce usage of cars and getting cars off the streets for a variety of reasons, then what can we do about agency parking to get them to use any number of the garages that we have that are not sold out and full, and get them off the streets to really see what that does for our community? Even if it was turned into metered parking, which would then make money for the city and allow people to travel, those are questions that I'm not sure how to phrase in this, but I'm certainly curious to find out.
Yeah, no, those are all great points. And I think this is turning into something that actually might end up being a good topic for like a future meeting. Maybe we do some research and see if we can get some experts or someone to speak on this topic, or just at minimum do some research for us, because it does seem like we do need to have a conversation about the current street parking regulations, and in addition, like why there's so much, or how there is so much agency specific street parking. For example, like there's streets that have parking for like, I don't know, DOT, or parking for different agencies, federal and state, or sorry, federal and city.
How can you tell me that actuaries have to have street parking?
Right.
What part of emergency, need to their car does an actuary have? Just saying.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I personally feel somewhat slighted by it, because it does feel like our neighborhood is being treated as a municipal parking lot. when it's our streets, and that's public space, and we deserve to be part of a conversation as to how that space is being allocated. So I completely agree.
And to Mariama's point, I do remember them, DOT presenting to us, oh gosh, Betty, I'm not sure if it was before your time, but you have a better memory than I do often. But they did present to us about meter changes specifically targeted to pricing increases in Tribeca because they felt it was able to be afforded.
That's before my time, so before this committee existed.
I don't remember what committee it came to, but I remember sitting there thinking, crap, that's going to be expensive.
Yeah, it was Tribeca. I think it was Tribeca committee, if I remember.
It must have been either that or quality of life. Yeah.
Well, Tammy, so to answer some of your questions, I'm sorry to interrupt, but to answer your question about mechanisms and how to deal with some of this, it could be just as simple, and before you came on, as Community Board 2 does, and it could be just a resolution saying, DOT, please modify the parking regulations on this residential street from no parking from 8 to 6 to alternate side parking. Thank you very much. And that's it.
Great. Yeah, no, that's helpful to know. So I guess we can look at kind of some of that language that CB2 has used in theirs. I'll make sure to look at that as well.
Piecemeal here and there kind of thing. And then overall, what Tammy was talking about, and you were talking about in regards to the agencies using parking, it could be a little more comprehensive as opposed to a piecemeal. We know what's going on this street in that corner,
sure,
that kind of thing. So it's a pincer movement, each different ways to attack it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
I think that you're right, Mark, but I also think the way that DOT sort of operates is with a one review look. And I mean that with no disparity, but for example, Amazon asked them for a space on Warren Street. They did not do a study on Murray or other options. They responded to the one request for that one street. So, I mean, we could take a look and say holistically, host meetings looking at a 3-block radius and parking, and God knows it would take years, but if that's the only way there just should be something easier than that. But
maybe Lucian, maybe you can talk to CB2 and see, because it's on their agenda all the time. I get their emails, how they tackle it. But there's always in their transportation committee, there's always some kind of parking regulation change that they want to switch. Maybe you can call them and see how they proceed, do it procedurally. Does that work? Is Lucian still there? Or I heard him, he's at the baby.
He's there, but Mark, I can tell you they do it block by block.
Yeah, that's some might have, maybe that's a start, it'll help here and there,
Cool. I saw, Pat, you've got your hand up. Mark, I saw you put your hand up, but did we hit you with that point?
Oh, I'm putting it down.
Cool. And then I see Mariama's got her hand up again. So I'll go to Pat and then Mariama.
Some of these issues I was going to answer, but some of you have already answered them, like Tammy. We have, a lot of these were quality of life issues and
right.
Before the Transportation Committee. And so, parking, I think Patrick brought this one up. We've had several buildings come to us over the years asking for a pickup and drop off spot in front of their buildings. DOT has been aware that this neighborhood this community has changed. We've talked about it in the Wall Street area where they blocked people off and they can't, get access to their blocks to pick up, or if they have elderly people who need to be picked up in front of their buildings. And so, it has to, the parking arrangements have to change according to the residency changes in the community. And again, as Tammy said, a lot of this has to do with agencies that have decided that they need all of this parking. We don't understand why. I mean, people, we work in New York, you take public transportation. I don't understand why they have to have agency cars for every single agency. and why they have multiple cars. So we've you know, several of these things have been on the books. I didn't quite hear what you said about scaffolding, but we know scaffolding has been on the books for ages. It's a problem in many respects. It affects many different issues in our community. So yeah, I'm here to continue working on them. I'm here to help you guys, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for joining, Pat. It's great to have you here. I'll go
Michael,
to Mariama. Oh, sorry,
Michael,
Betty. Yes.
can I just make one clarification?
Yeah, please,
I
please.
want you to know, because in fact, this came up with Jennifer Leung recently. We have somebody, in fact, next month, there's going to be a group coming forward about the signage in front of their building and the ability to drop and pick off people, something that Pat Moore just spoke about. It can be done. The procedure is for it to come to committee and a resolution go to the DOT, and that's how the DOT acts on it. So
Got it.
I want to clarify, there is a process. That is how it gets done. It will be done. Be very helpful for me as chair of the committee to have the idea of the community's priorities, because to have a bunch of individuals saying, this is a good signage change because I want this in front of my place. We need to hear a bigger picture stroke before you can deal with individuals with their personal agendas. So
we've had buildings that have come before quality of life, and LaFlucian's on the call. He and I just discussed this the other day. I was saying to him, whatever happened with those buildings that were requesting pick up and drop off, and DOT attended. This was the old commissioner, attended our meetings and said they'd look into it. And of course, there was agency parking on the block, one building in particular I'm thinking about, and they never got back. They never did anything about it. The residents gave up, we gave up. So I don't know if there's a new mechanism in place. It would be nice to know about it.
well, hopefully we'll be able to track it more closely as it comes through Transportation Committee. So I will take that as forewarning. And again, some of what Patrick said is the same issue. It's got to be done. There may need to be a different signage that we look into doing too. So there's actually a drop-off time, so someone can't be arrested for being in the wrong kind of signage. But that's another issue that's going to be coming up soon, as is agency parking is coming up soon, because there's a deadline for them to all make announcements of what their usage is. But again, another month or two, we'll be more prepared to talk about that. Sorry, Michael.
No, you're good. Thanks for jumping in, Betty. I was just going to go to Mariama, who I think you had your hand up, Mariama.
Yes, I did put it back up. So the last instance that Pat's talking about that I recall was on Duane Street. There was a building that the people couldn't even stop for a moment to try to unload their cars, and it was really a problem because there's so many other things that are there, the fire department and so on and so forth. Yeah, so we did have buildings like that would come to us that, you know, the moment you stop, there's somebody coming to give them a ticket or something, which is pretty, you know, disgusting. In any case, I wanted to piggyback up for quickly on what Tammy was saying, as well as kind of touching on what Brittany suggested. You know, when you have like a new turning signal or something, all of a sudden on the street, a new stop sign, there is a notification, at least on the street. They don't do that with parking, and it's more of like a gotcha, you know, or residents they're used to parking on a particular street. We have very few to choose from. You get sort of, you know where the parking places are, and all of a sudden there's a meter maid there that's ticketing people. I witnessed this recently in our neighborhood, and there was an agency that had taken over what prior to that had been parking at least all day on Sunday, with Monday through Saturday being 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So you could park in the evening and you could park all day on Sunday. This was a Sunday morning that I was there. I was in my car because I don't even like to take resident parking for a moment. So I would just like quickly let my kids out to go to the store, and I wasn't going to take up a parking space. Or if somebody came, I wanted them to know I'm leaving in a second, so you can have this space. So you need it more than me. And that's how I witnessed all of the people, like a whole line of people getting tickets. And I'm sure there were people from the neighborhood that were used to that being, you know, free parking on Sunday, and all of a sudden it wasn't. So notification would be fair in those instances too, instead of like this sort of like, gotcha, you know, now you got to pay $115. That's disgusting. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I was also going to say, quick time check. We've been talking about this for 30 minutes, so we'll try to wrap up the conversation in the next like 5 to 10 minutes so we can carry on with the agenda. I was going to ask, we talked a bit about the Open Streets program. And, it's been, I know it's been a lifeline for a lot of businesses, and I've been glad to see it helping or do what we can to help the restaurants and the businesses struggling in our district. I will say it has been a little heavy on helping private interests. These are private businesses that are taking public space. And again, glad to see them get the help that they need. But wondering if we should, or how people think about advocating for should the community have some sort of similar opportunity? Should residential buildings be able to have the opportunity to say, hey, in front of our building, like, we want to participate in this program as well, but we have increased need for, residential drop off and pickup, and that's what it should be, or whatnot. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Michael, just want to let you know, the member of the public with a hand up.
Oh, perfect. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, well, in that case, I'll cut off my rhetorical question and let's go to, it's Carrie Davidson. Okay, let's go to Carrie.
Hi, Michael. And I'm sorry to cut you off because I think you're on the right.
No, not at all.
I'm going to actually, I think, add on to what you might have started to say, which is that, with all of these balancing things, we're going to have to think about, how many people that space is serving, right? So are we serving the greater community by having a single private parking space, or by a residential loading and unloading, serving a tall residential building, or, you could argue that agency vehicles serve more people than a private car. So there are all of these things that I think are really important sort of civic conversations that I'm really excited that you guys are undertaking. And the document that you have there, thank you for sharing that link, because it makes it much easier to see the changes that you're making. But I think one of the things that we have to do with, or I would suggest that we look at, and maybe Jennifer can weigh in, is that we need to focus on how we're balancing the larger buckets. Like, how are we weighing the needs of pedestrians versus bike docks? How are we going to weigh freight truck loading and unloading for industry like construction, or UPS, FedEx, or open restaurants, right? Those are all businesses, I suppose, but they have different communities and they serve different people. And then I wonder whether or not, in weighing, should it be pedestrian use or vehicular use or bike use or shared car use or all of those things? Like, what is the metric for deciding how we balance those things? Is it the number of people served? Is it the ability to generate revenue for the city? Is it, just whoever puts in a resolution because they had enough people sign a petition? Like, what's the right way to, to organize these, these various interests? And I heard what Tammy said about, maybe you take 3 blocks at a time, or the CB2 method, which I also get those things because my office is in that area. And Mark's right, they have agenda items and it's block by block, use by use. You don't really get to a holistic point of view unless you've got a committee with a lot of institutional history. So I'm really excited about this conversation, and I like, all the things that I'm reading, and I really think it's great work that you guys are doing. And maybe Jennifer has something that she wants to add about how DOT is prioritizing these different uses.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carrie. I think you hit the nail on the head there, because that's the thing that ties all these things together, is that there is a finite amount of space in the city, and prioritizing any of these by necessity means that there's a trade-off, that it can't be used for this or that. And so, yeah, right. I would love if Jennifer is, I don't know if she can unmute herself. I know she's in the attendee list, but can you shed any light, Jennifer, maybe on how, on a high level, how DOT, what metrics it uses when making some of these decisions, and how I guess what the best or most efficient way for the community board to weigh in on this and tackle this and start to, put this in ways that makes it helpful for DOT.
So based on what I've been hearing, there's a lot of different groups that would be involved looking at this altogether. I mean, the curb reg, that's one group in itself. That would be the borough engineers, the ones who does the signage, because they would have to do their own surveys when they do those changes to the curb regulations. And I know when you guys were mentioning about loading and unloading zones, that's also maybe the same group, but at the same time, we will also have the Freight and Mobility unit take a look at it, because if it's also a mixed use area that they would have to look at the different uses for that block. Then I know when you throw in construction, that's a whole another group that would take a look at it. I mean, a lot of all these things, to me, everything that you just mentioned for the street use priority stuff, I think it would accumulate into like one big study where everyone in my agency, all the different groups would have to take a look at it based on what they've been working on throughout the city. I mean, when you guys were mentioning about how CB2 has on the agenda items to have like curb reg changes, you're correct that they do look at it based on someone that came to them or they thought that, okay, maybe this block, they've been, they have knowledge of this block, they have people that they've been working with, been speaking to, and they would like this to be changed. So they would put that in as a resolution, have it on the agenda. Most of the time I do attend that meeting. I listen to what they have to say. I could give them my, what I know. And sometimes if I get in advance, I might actually ask my borough engineers to take a look at it and see if it's something feasible. And if they do think that it's feasible, they would like them to make sure, get a resolution, and that's something that we could work on. And that applies to every, community board. I mean, we always get all these requests through, different ways. I mean, sometimes, even through our web forms, when we get certain constituent complaints or about certain areas where they want a certain regulation change, we will take a look at it. But at the same time, sometimes we won't just take that and just go ahead and obviously install it. We have to make sure that this, let the constituent know you must go to the community board, make sure they weigh in on it. And based on the resolution that they provide, then we're able to, continue, we'll always do a preview and try to, assess it a little bit before we make sure that it's something that we can do. I mean, sometimes we might have to do further study, and when we have to do further study, then we have to let them know that, okay, thank you for your support, but we have to make sure that this would work. And a lot of times there are certain, like I said, when it comes to curb regs, those are easier things to change. But when it comes to different asks, there might be different things that we have to look at. I don't know if that helps. Hopefully it does.
No, that does. Any insight helps. No, for sure. Thank you for weighing in there.
I'm going to jump and ask Jennifer a quick question on that. Jennifer, okay. If we are the constituents, because we as a community board are looking to reduce agency parking, because we know that the agencies will not come willingly to the plate, are we allowed to make those requests, or does it have to go through the agency?
So,
because our area is so different because of the amount of federal, state, and local.
So are you asking, like, say, like a particular block has too many agency parking that you want us to, like, shorten it, or like, or I'm trying to think of an example what you're trying to ask us to do.
Think of an example. So on Greenwich Street between Barclay and Murray. Okay. If we said, there's agency parking there 7 days a week, but we would like to know if that agency parking could be either reduced, removed, or changed to business hours, Monday through Friday, 7 to 5 or whatever, and either be metered or free afterwards, which would help facilitate parking availability for people attending Target and Whole Foods and the ancillary small businesses in that zone. We are the community board coming to ask that.
Okay.
Jennifer, this
I
is
think that can be
echoing
requested.
57 Reed Street that Pat Moore was describing. Was the community board asked DOT to audit the amount of agency authorized parking that was actually necessary for, I can't recall what agency it was for that particular street, but the agency makes a request, the DOT says you can have a subset of that, but the question is, how much do they really need, and are they using the amount that's set aside for them? And we'd like to right size that as a first step, is what that particular resolution was, and I think that's what we'd like to see all over the district.
Because I would say that typically each agency that comes to us, we have to have them submit us application and a survey. Like they have to give us the number of cars that they have, and based on where they're located, there's a formula that we look at, and based on that formula, that's the number of spots that they get. But oftentimes they don't get all the spots that they are requesting. Say like they have like 30 vehicles and they're asking for 10 spots. I think our formula will only allow them to have maybe 3 or 4 or something like that.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
I mean, right now,
Pat. But Jennifer, is that reviewed? Get the 3 spots, and how long do they have those 3 spots? A year or forever, or is it reviewed depending on the changes in the neighborhood?
well, this is the thing. Oftentimes, my office, we're not aware when the agency is no longer using those spaces. And if there are spaces that you guys know of, certainly send us the request and those spaces can return back to the public. Or if you realize that maybe that agency is no longer the same amount of vehicles that are using that space, then we could also definitely take a look and, resurvey them. Because what we do is that our authorized parking unit is the one who does all the coordination, and they're the ones who assess, see if they need that many or what's the reason. And a lot of times, especially down here, we really try to say no, because I don't think there's any more space for us to provide them. I mean, every now and then they will come to us for relocation, which we would end up trying to see if we can relocate, and then sometimes we end up discovering, wait, why do they have that many spots when they're already using other spots? Like we will actually
Jennifer,
take that back.
this is Patrick. Who reviews DOT's inventory of those spots? DOT, as you know, in financial district has a lot of those spots. So how does that work?
You mean our own agency?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Could you let us know?
Patrick, don't bite the hand that feeds you yet.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Got it. No worries. And yeah, sorry to put you on the spot, Jennifer, but this is all really great information. Pat, I apologize for not calling on you earlier. Did you have anything else to add? I see your hand up, and I see Mark's. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you if you could send this document to us in an email. I'm using my phone and I can't read it. So.
Oh, sure, of course. I will send you this in an email. Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
For sure. And I saw Mark, you've had your hand up. Was it from a past question? Something new?
Sorry, Michael, for opening this can of worms. But two things. I have one, a comment and a question. The way these things will come to us is they're not necessarily personal requests, personal needs. It's just you live in a community and you're there all day and you know what works and what doesn't work. So that's how the request would come to us, just like in CB2. And I mean, in the next couple of months, I have a few that I know that I'll ask to have put on the agenda that are pretty much no-brainers. We'll start with the ones that are easy and simple, a couple of blocks, and I think I can get some support on that. But I have a question for Jennifer, and correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think there's no such thing as there's loading zones, there's hotel loading zones, but on the books, I don't think there's such a thing as residential loading zones. Would there have to be new regulations set up for that? Correct me if I'm wrong.
So I think right now there is a piloting that we're doing for residential loading zones. Let me find out if there's more information I could provide this committee, because I think I recall hearing something about that. I think we're piloting that. I mean, it's to allow vehicles, passenger cars to be able to drop off and pick up, right?
Yeah, something like that, right?
Mhm.
Like a taxi zone, but it's for residents only, or non-commercial vehicles, non-taxis, that kind of thing. I don't know how you would word it on the sign, but do you know where the pilot program is?
I would have to get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Mark. And I see Detta, I'll go to you next. I was just also going to say it's 7, so we'll try to wrap up this conversation in the next 5 minutes. There's clearly more to talk about, and I can start taking a stab at organizing this. But I'll let Detta go first, actually. The floor is yours, Detta, if you can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, so the pilot program is that Jennifer was speaking about is in several different neighborhoods in Brooklyn. I think it's been going on a couple years already. That's the residential loading, unloading. Second of all, also to what Brittany said, I think it would be really good. I do support open streets, but it would be good if there is signage, you know, before you hit that open area, maybe 2, 3, 5 blocks back, warning that it's coming, so somebody could choose to make a turn and go a different route. And then the third thing, yeah, the third thing I want to say is, I think in general we want to have priorities that allow people to get to the curb when they need to. You know, whether that's the, you know, residents who need to do some loading, unloading, whether that's a commercial vehicle, whether that's a delivery vehicle. Like, we need people to be able to have curbside spots when they need it, and to say that whatever parking regulations are going to support that are what would be good, whether that's, you know, metering the street so there's turnover, or creating more loading zones and enforcing them. Or, you know, and I agree with what others have said about looking at the times, so that the times that we, you know, that meters are in effect and the times that a loading zone are in effect make sense. I mean, there are some streets where when the businesses are open and metering it till 10 p.m. makes sense, you know, but it, I just think in general, my support would just be for whatever helps keep the curb available for those who need it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Detta. So I am going, it looks like, I think we've gotten most everybody with their hands up. So I think we're going to close the discussion now. It's clearly not over. And thanks for bearing with us. I know it's difficult to have these sort of like open, very open-ended conversations. But I think what's going to come out of this is, let me digest some of these and see if any of these fit into buckets, and we'll continue this conversation into our next committee meeting. I also think some of these topics that we've taken up are going to end up turning into standalone items on future committee agendas. But I actually don't want to speak too much. I'll turn it over to Betty actually to see if you have any closing comments on this topic.
No, actually, I agree with you. In fact, I can think of some upcoming agenda items, future talks that are going to specifically touch on many of these things. So the idea of the priorities, and I'm kind of glad to hear a little bit more gelling around certain things being important to a wide swath of the committee members and public that are speaking, because that's kind of what I had the point of doing this, was to get a sense of the priorities of the community, rather than hearing 1 or 2 people yell really loudly at a particular item that comes up. The broader picture would be nice to know about the district.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Betty. So with that, I'll turn things back to you, Betty, to carry on the meeting, and I will switch back to the agenda. And I'll also just note that I'll send around, so you guys should have the link in the chat, but I'm happy to send around the that Google Doc to anyone who needs it, and feel free to go in there and add any thoughts that weren't captured in the discussion we just had.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go on to, if you go to the next slide. And we're going to talk about Revel electric mopeds sharing in CD1. Again, this is a continuation from last month. Let me go to the next. Because we're moving into a resolution after having already discussed this, I want to remind those who may not have been here or Thanksgiving kind of distracted them a bit with some of the things that were pointed out last month. And Carol Tunis is here who can answer questions from Revel as well for people who have questions. But it is an app-based scooter sharing rental service. And again, the scooters are mopeds. They cost $1 per person to unlock and then 35 cents a minute. So it's relatively low cost. But I also wanted to remind people, in case it didn't come up, those who have any kind of low income, they're in NYCHA, they're in any federal, local, or other program that has to do with low income, qualify for a 40% discount when they register with the app. Military members, veterans, retirees, all get a 20% discount. So it is low cost for many people for different reasons. They are zero emissions, so they do meet the New York Climate Leadership Mandate, where we're going to have to reduce emissions in New York State within this decade. The New York State Department of Motor Vehicles classifies those scooters as Class B limited use motorcycles. They do not need motorcycle licenses or mopeds. They do need a license plate. They cannot be capable of going faster than 30 miles per hour. That's what defines a moped. The driver must have a driver's license, but again, not a motorcycle license, and they must wear a helmet. They did, after a couple of deaths, close themselves down and then worked with the DOT to come back in December 27th of this year, where the DOT approved a relaunch program. With that, they put in training videos, again, via their app. They have a safety test, and they have to have photographic evidence of the user wearing the helmet. Helmets are provided by Revel, so they come with the scooter. Riders don't have to provide their own. There are 2 helmets available for each scooter, so there can be 1 passenger. The Revel shuts down its scooters from midnight to 5 a.m., another concession they made to the DOT, because that's what they considered the riskiest for riders, riskiest hours. And the safety report that Revel has says their average speed is 12.3 miles per hour. Some of you might laugh and say, when does traffic move faster than that anyway? But nevertheless, I want you to know that most of the time they're not going their maximum 30 mile per hour speed. Go to the next. Next slide. Thanks. There were some questions that were raised, and so it was my mission this month, and the reason we put it off a month was over these particular questions. Since the maximum speed is only 30 miles per hour, and they are forbidden on highways, major bridges, and tunnels, that's New York State DMV rules, can mopeds be operated on West Street in our district and in District 2, because of course that's how they would get into our district. If the sensors on mopeds are used to track their locations to determine if they are breaking rules, then how sensitive are those sensors at tracking locations? Another question, since we have received complaints about the use on bike paths and in parks, other places where they're not allowed, how can people complain about illegal or undesired operation of these mopeds? And what regulations or laws exist for mopeds and moped sharing in New York City? So now you know what I've been doing for the last month was getting answers to these questions. And next, give you some of the answers that I have gotten both from Revel as well as from the DOT. Under current New York City DOT regulations, Revel mopeds, in fact, all mopeds, can legally operate on the 9A corridor, including West Street, from Battery Place to West 54th Street. As with other legal roads, they must be operated in the right lane except when they're making a left turn. So now you know the DOT rules about that. The GPS receivers on the scooters use data from over 30 navigational satellites to figure out locations. However, these signals are somewhat obscured in dense urban areas, such as ours. So Revel's location data cannot differentiate a street from an adjacent sidewalk or bike path. Next, Revel encourages complaints or reports about behaviors being made via both their app. You can do it easily, and you can put it on your phone or anywhere else, the app, even if you're not a user. If you want to use it simply for making reports, you can also use their email or calling them. But because of the concern that we heard last month about 311 really being the mechanism for how people make complaints about things and how the city government tracks complaints for things, so they are working with Councilmember Chin's office to develop a way to use 311 to report problems that Revel can act on. Next, I think there are a few more comments answering those questions. The DOT's interim agreement with Revel gives DOT access to anonymized Revel data that is being used to closely monitor Revel's operations. So they are learning about the speeds they're going, the locations they're going, if there are any incidents, accidents, or other things with the bicycles, with the motor scooter, with the mopeds. That is being followed in real time. Moped use is legal in New York State, so we are not discussing if mopeds should be allowed. We are really talking about moped share service, which gets us to the next one. New York City Council is currently working on Law 6773, which would be oversight of shared mopeds and e-scooters. Again, e-scooters are a side light, but they're not in Manhattan anyway. And a Law 2061, a local law which would amend the administrative code of the City of New York, which would grant DOT approval for shared moped organizations. Without that, actually nobody controls saying a new organization can come in anytime they want. So those two laws will both be important for New York City. Neither has passed at this point. They're too early on. However, although Law 2061 has not yet passed, the DOT is creating a permit system to formally regulate shared moped systems. So they're anticipating those like Revel in New York City. The rulemaking process is expected to begin this year. They don't expect it to be completed until sometime next year, perhaps even as late as the end of the year. Next year is very eventful because we have a lot of changes in city offices. So I'm sure that is one of the issues going on here as well. And next, I think, go to the next slide. Okay, I want to move back one. I want to hear what people have to say, and then we'll come to this. And Mark, is your hand still up, or is that, you have a question, comment?
Yeah, I had it still up, but I do have a question. I'll take it down now. It wasn't necessarily related to what you were saying, but there is a representative here from the
Correct.
Okay, so I've noticed in the neighborhood that the bikes, the mopeds are being parked incorrectly. You know, it's supposed to park a motorcycle or a moped back into the curb, so the back of the tire is touching the curb or right, you know, close to it. But they're parking it the opposite direction, parallel, as if you were parking a car, and it's taking up spaces, car spaces. How is that something you can address to help us with that, particularly since we have so little parking, as you heard in the previous conversation?
First, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me. I totally hear your concern on that, on parking. I know like space is very, very limited right now, especially with all the outdoor dining going on. So if you were to see a Revel parked incorrectly, you can just submit a report through our community app on the website. You could call our team, email us. But also we do have full-time employees that are going around. They're constantly swapping batteries, disinfecting the mopeds. And if they see a parking job that is just incorrect, illegal, they will actually physically move the moped as well.
Okay, and just to follow up, can you send that information to our board office, the contact information you mentioned? And just to follow up with regards to the bikes, the mopeds being picked up or repaired or whatever, you're still not doing that between the hours, I think, was it like between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m.? That's still not happening in downtown? You work that out?
Correct. We worked that out. So we flagged it for our operations team. And so we apologize for that one time.
You said you were going to fix that last month or the month before, and I just wanted to follow up and thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. And Tammy?
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate Revel being willing to engage dynamically. I also sit on the Hudson River Park Trust Advisory Council, and the topic of Revel scooters has become a large conversation there, as well as, I'm sure you know, in individual boards. One of the concerns that I have, I understand that you may not be able to see sidewalks, but the trust goes from has a long area that needs to be protected and covered along the bike path, as well as within the piers themselves. And that extends down to the Esplanade in Battery Park City, all through the local park areas, Wagner Park, the Battery, and then coming around the other side onto the bike path and over by Pier 17 in the East River. My concern and question is, I understand that your GPS location may not tell you a sidewalk in the middle of the density of FIDI, but is there a way that you can augment or work with the city to find an augmentation, just like they do cell phone boosters, to be able to ensure that the Revel scooters are not ridden on the bike paths and within our parks themselves?
Thank you, Tammy. I think what I want to just point out first is any green space. So I'm not totally familiar with the area you're mentioning now, so I would love for us to follow up after this conversation. But if it's a green space anywhere in the city, that's already part of the no ride zone that we have. So anybody riding in that area would be suspended from the platform. But definitely, I think we're always open to working with the city and improving the technology that we have to make sure that there's no illegal riding going on. So any kind of suggestions from UT or anybody else that has the technology to maybe help us augment the capabilities of our GPS, I think that we're always open to having that conversation and exploring that technology.
So I'd love for you to have a conversation with both the Downtown Alliance as well as the Hudson River Park Trust, because anything that you can do to work, I don't know if the Wi-Fi services that they have can be helpful, but the other question is whether there is a way to install something that would alert riders in those zones that they need to leave. I mean, I have personally seen them. You and I have spoken about this. I've seen them, driving around Castle Clinton in Battery Park proper, as well as on the Esplanade along the edges of the water and over by Pier 25 or 6. So that's one set of concerns that I have. I'm delighted to know that you're working with 311. That is really helpful, because I think it is unfair to put the public who may not be a rider, but who sees any type of infraction, they know to call 311 because that is the main way that you would get information in. I will say that currently, as Betty is well aware and you are, if you report to 311 a Revel scooter blocking something as major as a fire hydrant, it goes nowhere. And the case is closed on 311 within moments. And while one might say that that was an unusual thing that I was lucky to happenstance upon, it was one of 3. So if I've gotten the same response 3 times, you know where I'm going on that. So do you have any updates on maybe how long it would take to get 311 integration?
I don't have any updates right now. It's something that we're working with the council member on and we're exploring right now. Unfortunately, tonight I don't have a further update.
Thank you very, very much.
Great, and if there are no other hands up discussion, I'd like to go on to the next slide because we'd like to move on to the resolution. These are things I'm only suggesting as a point of conversation. They can all be changed. Nothing's been voted on. I want people to know the direction. So when we do move to vote after discussion, people are well informed before they vote. The first one, supporting Revel Moped's share operation in New York City. And I hope you see the value of it and say, yes, they're being very responsible. Let's support their continuation. 2, to urge New York City Council to pass legislation that will regulate the use of moped share organizations. As I said, that's already being discussed and worked on. This would be merely to make sure they keep moving on that and perhaps pass it. Urge the New York City Department of Transportation to develop the regulations for moped share, which again, they have acknowledged and the law would mandate them to do. But as our input would be to provide clear guidance and signage for where mopeds cannot be driven, which kind of mirrors what Tammy has just said. And what really inspired me to think about it too was if you look at West Street as you head south, and I don't know how many people would be crazy enough on a moped to do that, but the 2 right lanes go straight into go down into the ground and go to places they shouldn't be going. Are there warnings? And is there the signage to tell them, wait, you're approaching a place where you can't go, and we don't need you crossing 2 lanes of high moving traffic at the very last second when you find out. So signage to be worked on also to make it safe for everybody, to enforce where they can't go. 4, encourage the New York City and New York State DOTs to work together to calm traffic on West Street, again, from Battery Place to West 54th Street, in order to protect the moped users from the larger, heavier vehicles that frequently exceed 30 miles per hour. Why? Because 41 miles per hour is the minimum to be considered speeding, even if there was enforcement, which is quite a bit faster than the 30 mile per hour maximum that a moped can go. The 5th is to encourage Councilmember Chin, again, to work with Revel on this 311 process. So are there any comments, discussion about the resolution itself, which are these statements? And I'm seeing no hands. If so, I'd like to move to vote. Oh, sorry, Carrie Davidson.
And Betty, before you go there, Cora just texted me because she's over in the other way.
Yeah, but her hand wasn't up. Yes, please.
Okay. Who's the staff member from the council member Chin's office that they're working with?
Carol? Carol, are you available? Because I don't know the answer to that.
Neither does Cora.
Okay, well, we'll find out. Carrie?
Thank you, Betty. I was just going to suggest, I used to ride a moped in San Francisco, and so I have an experience with this. And one of the things that's really helpful is to tell moped or scooter drivers where they're supposed to be. Like, a lot of this language is what not to do, but hopefully there's going to be some sort of education campaign that informs moped riders or the Revel rider how to ride safely, that they should be in the right-hand lane. That anyway, that the resolution doesn't have like an education campaign component. It just seems it'd be nice to have an education campaign. So it's just I wasn't even going to raise my hand, and then I thought, well, I've been involved in a scooter accident, and it was partly because there just wasn't good signage. There weren't clear rules of the road. And as we are New Yorkers, we're learning how to negotiate between these different forms of transportation, right? When it was just taxis and pedestrians, you sort of figured out how to manage that relationship. Then we added bikes, and then we've got a new wrinkle to the relationship, right? And now you add scooters. It's just, we're getting kind of wrinkly, if you will. So having something that encourages an active campaign for proper usage would be helpful. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I have two responses to that. One, I'm going to ask Carol to speak if she's still on, because I see that she's on. But
Oh,
also,
good.
thank you. I will look at number 3 of these resolves. For the signage and guidance would be to warn mopeds. Because, yeah, the big thing is them knowing before they end up where they can't make a move out of a lane, such as when they're going down. So no, I will work on that wording to reflect your comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty.
Betty, would you accept a friendly amendment that supports what she just said about urging New York City more than legislation or developing regulations, but to work on a public relations marketing campaign of education surrounding this?
Education to whom?
Public. Because a public education so people understand
what mopeds are.
Well, that they're supposed to be written, or, oh, sorry, I'm not unmuted, but that they're supposed to be ridden in the right-hand lane, for example. People who are new to mopeds may not know whether they follow vehicular rules or they follow bike share rules.
That's why I want Carol to speak, because they have this education on their app, and let's hear from her what.
And then Betty, I received a follow-up text from Cora. She checked with her colleagues. They don't seem to be aware either. So it would be really good to have Carol identify who she's working with.
Yeah, does she need to be unmuted?
I see her on. She's off mute now. Hey, Carol.
Hey, sorry, I was unable to unmute myself. I appreciate, we were introduced to council members Chin's staff, and we have not followed up yet, but we are in the process of working out internally what the process to connect with 311 would be on our end. So that's something that's in the work for us, which is why I said I didn't have any further updates tonight. In terms of education, we are running paid media campaigns on user education. We just developed a series of winter riding tips. We have a new how-to video that is coming out in the next couple of days that will be up available in the app, as well as on our website and YouTube. Very in detail, detailing how to ride the revel, how to park properly, how to actually engage with the throttle, how to make a turn. So all of that information is available on our social channels, on our website, and we're also continuing to follow up via email with our riders as well. And I think I heard something about signage. I was trying to frantically try and unmute myself, so I might have missed part of the conversation. But definitely, we think that's absolutely right. A lot of the times, it's not that people don't want to follow the rules, just that they don't know what the rules are, which is why we try really hard through our onboarding process to relate to folks what the rules of the road are, how to ride safely and properly. So there is a 42-question safety training that everyone has to go through. They have to watch the video, which is about 4 minutes long, and how to actually operate the moped. We're constantly sending reminders to our users via app, email, on our social channels, on just riding tips, riding safely, and following the law.
Great, thank you. And do you have any comments to make about general public education about mopeds versus just your riders themselves?
No comments. I think he does a great job with rider education, and we're working with DOT on ways that we could also improve our communications to riders. So that's something that we're working on with them.
Great, yeah, and so I think it's gonna be just a general issue of drivers of other vehicles understanding the limitations and necessities of mopeds, because it's a very different kind of vehicle on the road. And Mark, then Mimi?
Just a procedural thing. I brought this point up a few times, and at some point it's supposed to be put on the executive committee agenda, but the idea of a resolution being presented to us written where we really should be constructing these things organically at the committee. And Tammy, no offense, but you fell into the trap. This is not even a voted on resolution, and you asked to make a friendly amendment to something that doesn't exist. So this is the issue that maybe members of the committee maybe constricts them
Mark,
from thinking.
I take my wording back as being a friendly addition, but this is not pre-scripted. This was notes. Betty was very clear. Listen to what she said.
I understand, but that's the problem when these things appear as resolution. We really should be producing them through a conversation.
Mark, let me say that I completely disagree with you. The way of Robert's rules is the exact wording needs to be made visible and well known to those voting. So while these can be changed, and in some cases need to be changed, and Lucian has been very good about making changes, he can certainly change to this screen to one where he's more dynamically typing the changes in. You are not representing the true Robert's rules, so please don't present them as facts.
No, actually, you're wrong about that, Betty. Betty, you're wrong.
Okay, whoa, Betty,
you're right
Mark.
about the words are supposed to be written, but they're supposed to be written in front of us, not presented to us.
Mark, as chair, I am telling you, we will take this up in a dialogue.
Thank you.
I have no troubles with that, but this is not a place to argue about Robert's rules. We're trying to work on this resolution.
Well,
and yes,
the committee chair.
Mark, to quote our new VP, I'm speaking. All right? Just relax. I get what you're saying. There's different interpretations of the rules. Lucian and I will have an ask out. We have an understanding. If you want to have a conference call on it with Lucian, I'm happy to do it. But I really don't want to do that here in the middle of trying to work through Revel. Revel has come to us twice. We have Cora's team on. We want to continue the work.
By the board, not a conference call.
Fine, I'll be happy to send a ruling out by email because this is the way we're working.
It needs to be debated in committee and at the full board.
Mark, stop. I'm going to ask you to be muted if you don't continue. If it's about Revel, let's talk about this and Revel. If it's not, stop. Stay on task. Betty.
Yes.
Councilmember Chin's office does not have an active dialogue ongoing with Revel. Please, I think number 5 needs to be reversed around because Chin's office says no one from their team is working with them. So that needs to be reworked to be quite strongly worded, in my opinion. Again,
just the wording you want. Oh, go back,
CB1 strongly urges Revel to work with Councilmember Chin and whatever the agency that handles 311 to develop a way for citizens to report problems related to the operations of Revel mopeds and for information to go directly to Revel for solution and follow-up so they can be tracked.
Okay, it's too small for me to see. Lucian, are you typing right now?
Sorry, that was me. I moved just after Tammy finished speaking, so I missed most of that, but I can catch that, Tammy, in the recording and add that in here.
Well, actually, no, if you can type this document,
Yes, I can.
It strongly encourages Revel.
Whoops.
Right.
Why aren't we?
Lucian,
This is,
what agency
this is
it that does
it's
311?
DCAS. DCAS, the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, does 311.
Thank you, Data.
If you want to put Revel and, she's saying it's DCAS, but, or just say 311.
It should be 311 DCAS.
I'll reach out to the department that do it, or IT. Typically I interface with them for 311, and I'll make that, I'll optimize it for after I hear from them.
Perfect. I mean, really, its council member will support the effort, but we're urging the agency and Revel to get it together.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you for the wording, for the change.
Not a problem.
And that's what we need to make a change again to number 3 as well, in response to what Carrie's comment was. And that was, we're gonna have to provide advanced warning signage where mopeds cannot drive. Because again, if you're going to a busy place and you find out something it's too late for you to turn, you're kind of stuck. So it needs to be signage. So they're advised. Well, to warn, actually to warn them that it's a location where they can't, that mopeds are not allowed. So maybe warn is the word.
Warn, to provide advanced warning. So instead of clear guidance, clear guidance to warn.
Instead of clear guidance, it can be advanced warning.
Gotcha. Does that look good, or did you want to add warning somewhere else?
No, because I just don't want them so late that they really can't do anything about it, because I don't want them scared and turning into traffic that's moving faster than they are.
Okay. I know this is a bit smaller than the slides, but let me know if anyone, I can try to increase this here. I saw that Mimi had her hand up as
and
well.
Tammy,
Sorry.
sorry, one second. Carrie and Tammy, are those changes okay with you with your respective comments? Is there a muting problem? And then I'll get to you, Mimi.
Carrie, you're
Yeah.
on mute now.
Thank you. Yeah, mine was really about the larger sort of public education program for non-writers. So I don't think it's something that, I was suggesting that Revel, it sounds like Revel has a good app and education campaign within their app. I think it's really more a question about how our streetscapes are going to be shared by multiple types of vehicles. So it's really a DOT education campaign to let the public know about, how vehicular traffic, moped traffic, bicycle traffic, and pedestrians are going to navigate all of that shared space. So it's a little different, but I appreciate you allowing me to have the input.
Great, and for you, Michael, I guess the comment there would be where you have and to provide, it should be and signage to provide advanced warning. So I want something physical in real time that you can see before it's too late. And Mimi?
Hi, I'd like to preface everything with I'm a licensed motorcyclist. I've ridden a motorcycle in the city for over 2 years now. And it's horrifying. It's a really scary thing to do. But the overall concept to me that you can have a normal license with no extra training and get on these is a little novel. And it seems like perhaps in that regular driving course, we could attempt to persuade the city or whoever it is that manages those tests for New York State to consider including more direction for drivers with cars that drive with Revels on the street. Not just Revels, like people can start buying their own electric scooters and put them on the road, right? Like this isn't just like people want to rent these, people want to buy these and have them for their own personal use. And so it just seems like if there's any way we could suggest, you know, preparing drivers of cars to, you know, better keep an eye out and how to like manage being around these mopeds on these, you know, 25-mile-hour roads could be useful. And I don't know that this is the right forum for it. But if there was a way that we could require people that move in from out of state to take some sort of, you know, because I just transferred my license over from Colorado to New York, and then I got my motorcycle license in New York. So I received motorcycle training in New York, but I didn't receive any sort of, you know, extra training to know how to deal with all the different kinds of vehicles that are on our streets, especially in the city. And it seems that, you know, educating just regular drivers with a, you know, without motorcycle endorsement, how to deal with everybody else that's on the street could be really useful. It is dangerous out there.
Yes, actually, that was a brilliant idea. And one, you are correct. This is not the forum to do it because this is specifically about Revel only. But I think it'll be a great idea to look at a resolution to the state DMV about driving, putting into their testing system questions about driving among micro-transport mopeds, because I agree that is a whole new dimension to who's on the road. Does that work for you, Mimi?
Yeah, awesome. Glad to hear it.
Great. Well, then look at that forward, and I will. If you have any great suggestions of things, let me know in advance, and I'll consider them for whereas, and it'll probably reflect a little maybe who might be a good speaker to bring in to talk about it too.
Sure thing. That sounds good.
So thank you. Any other comment about the actual therefore be it resolved statements? Because that's what we're going to vote on for the resolution. And of course, they can be changed in full board. But I want to get it checked here because it's the one place where we can make changes without motion. So. And great, if I see nothing coming up, then someone wants to make a motion that we end discussion and move into a vote. Michael, are you willing to move?
Yes. Oh, yes, you've got my motion. Yeah, to call the question.
Okay, you get a second?
I can second, but you forgot my point about a marketing campaign specifically for a public marketing campaign.
Give me the wording that you want for an additional, therefore be it resolved. I'll let Michael type.
Yes.
Thank you.
CB1 urges New York City Department of Transportation to develop a robust public marketing campaign to explain the rules and regulations and usage of moped share. I don't know what the sharing is or shared usage and street rules.
Actually, it would just be mopeds because moped share would be how Revel runs their organization, but it wouldn't really affect riders on their mopeds.
Sounds good.
I'm going to guess if I got a private moped, you would want me educated as much as somebody riding a Revel, correct?
And I would pay to see you on a moped. Yes, Betty.
Yes, so would I.
Thank you very
much. Or maybe not.
Thank you. Thanks, Tammy.
Is that
and
okay?
Lucian for cleaning that up.
Yeah.
Exactly. And thank you, Lucian. And with that, I'm second for calling the question.
Great. Then why don't we assume it's a yes? And I'm going to ask people to individually last name and those that are against voting no. Again, unmute yourself and speak it orally, last name and vote. Then I'm going to assume. What about abstentions?
Amoruso abstain.
Great. Anyone else for abstain? And I can't for the life of me think of what is the other comment that you can make besides no?
Recused.
Recused, thank you. The word. Any recusals? Great, then the motion passes, then the resolution passes. And we can move on to the next topic. Accessoride. This was a discussion, again, following up from last month to close it up. More information than I've been able to retrieve. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you what I learned. There were answers from last month. We had spoken about only narrowing it down to Accessoride for same-day travel because so much is in flux with the MTA. So at this time, only same-day travel. Given that, Accessoride, I learned, does allow users to call 24/7 to get authorization to use a taxi and get reimbursed. So again, the whole bit of scheduling a standard ride on an Accessoride system has to be at least 24 hours in advance. They stop taking reservations at 5 p.m. for the next day. But in fact, the phone system is active 24/7, 365 days a year, and at any time, a user can get an authorization to get reimbursed. And starting, I can't say this month anymore, starting November, you can do this online. It used to be you had to collect your receipts and mail it in. And anyway, it is still 4 to 6 weeks they guarantee for reimbursement because this whole system is new. They just started the online. But anyway, there is a mechanism. It's not great for the poorest of the poor because you do have to pay out your taxi fare and get reimbursed. People I spoke to who are lower income said when it's an emergency and they use it, not a big problem because they budget for that and take the refund counting on the next trip when they may need to do that. So the MTA has announced but has not implemented changes yet to the Accessoride program. One of them that has been announced is they have renegotiated. They will no longer be using their own vans, such as you saw on the last slide, which you'll probably be horrified to learn. Subsidy for those rides was about $80, is what the MTA told me.
Right, $80 per ride per person.
Yes, per ride. So yes, per person. And so in an attempt to save money, they have negotiated with private vendors with their own vehicles to do really the same service, just different drivers with different vehicles. And the negotiated rate is $31 to $32 subsidy per ride. So I know that, but again, those dates aren't quite known with when that's kicking in, but that is the more finalized part. Otherwise, everything else is going to remain unchanged other than those vendors. And as I was told, everything is in flux. Even the pilot program that I told you about, where people who can use the taxi service, they did propose changes. What they told me with limitations, what I was told last week was that those have not been implemented yet. They expect them to be implemented, but they think all the rules will change from what they've said in the past because the MTA troubles keep getting deeper and deeper. So my recommendation is actually that we do nothing at this particular time about a resolution related to Accessoride. So I'm going to open that to discussion. And Tammy? Tammy, is your hand up about Accessoride? You're muted.
Apologies. Nope, I'm taking it down. I will wait to the end.
Great. So I don't see any other hands. I'm going to guess nobody has anything they want to particularly say on the topic of Accessoride. Then I'm going to assume that you agree with me that at this time we're going to leave that alone and not address a resolution for Accessoride. So we'll move on to the next item, which is a local law that I directed you to something you could read, a report that was made about it. I thought, kind of enjoy this one, which addresses hazardous obstructions. It is a local law, and this wording that you see below is actually from the law itself. So as otherwise permitted by law, no one shall park, stop, or stand a vehicle within a radius of 1,320 feet of a school building, entrance or exit, to block a bicycle lane, a bus lane when bus lane restrictions are in effect, the sidewalk, the crosswalk, or a fire hydrant. B, as an alternative to other means of enforcement. So as all of us have gotten really tired of placard and other abuse with no police enforcement, they have said that it's going to go directly to the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings for $175 versus the old $115 fine. So there's a $60 increase in the penalty. Go to the next one, see more of the law. Next slide, great. The civilian, this is part of my favorite part. Any natural person, excluding personnel of the department. The department is the DOT because they are the ones who are going to handle the portal that allow the citizens to report these various transgressions into. So no one from the DOT or any other employee of a city authorized to do a summons for the violations are allowed to be acting as a citizen who makes these complaints and collects the money. But if so, they'll file a form prescribed by the commissioner, which would be of the DOT. The department or DOT shall publish on its website information for how to file these civilian complaints. The department shall provide a tracking number to anyone who files a complaint within 3 days so they can track it. It's very much like the idling law that's out there. That's what they sort of followed. So you can follow it as it moves into the court system and what happens and if you're going to get your money. Because as the last one talks about, any complaint submitted, the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings shall award the complainant 25% of the sum that's collected. Keep in mind, that is the $175 fine. You would get 25% of that amount when they collect it. Keeping in mind that sometimes this will allow them to track also how many times the judges throw it out because someone comes forward with a placard and says, no, 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 I can do this. So it'll be an interesting tracking system, if nothing else. Will this whole process be? And one other, if you go to the next slide. I want you to get a visual because Lucian worked this out for me. He took our district, he ran where all the schools are, which are the red dots, the shaded areas, which you'll see are only northwest, extreme northwest of Tribeca, right by where a little bit of Brookfield buildings actually are, and also Gateway inside around their immediate buildings. The only places in our community district that are not covered by this law. So it is most all places. So Fidei and Seaport, they're all good to go.
What do you want to bet? All the placards just end up in that little triangle in Northwest Tribeca.
That is my fear, but yes. We're paying money to judges, but Tammy?
But Betty, I will say the flaw in this map that I want everyone to know is that it's being calculated from the center point of the school, which is where I assume New York City established the coordinates of the dot. That this is from the official data set, and the law says it's measured from the school entrance or exit. So
doors, right.
while that could mean that we actually have more coverage of the law, just depending on how many entrances and exits the school has, and this is actually from the center of the actual building. So, it could create some more opportunities, but this is just illustrative.
Here's a fun question for you. With the cutting of summer youth programs and not having enough jobs to go around, do you have to be 18 to participate?
That was not in the definition of a citizen. There was no age limitation.
Yeah, just natural. You just can't be, according to what we'd have to look to see what the natural person definition is under city law. but you just can't be someone who otherwise has enforcement duties, from my read of the
Right,
language.
or DOT.
Right.
I'm seeing a lot of jobs for people walking back and forth to schools.
Well, I know what I'm doing on my lunch break is all I'm saying.
Well, I was going to say, by the end of this, we may not have any homeless at all because everyone will have the money to live where they want. Yes, no, it is an interesting law. And Detta, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I had just a question. So this would mean like even the back-end parking that's half on the sidewalks around police precincts or firehouses, if that's within the distance of a school, that could be reported?
No, if you go back right now, and that's, thank you, that takes me to the next point. It is bus lanes, it is bike lanes, it is fire hydrants and with sidewalks too. So yes, it would include those sidewalks. And what has been reported is that it includes city owned vehicles as well as placards. It is not specifically just placards, it is anybody. And in fact, they highlighted that even the NYPD's own vehicles aren't excluded by this law as counting. So for those of you who are really irked about the city agencies, if they do the wrong thing, they're fair game as well, all those vehicles.
Yeah, so if you're going to do this at police precinct, just bring the ACLU with you.
Well, and that is some of the concern, is that you may want to travel with some people when you are, it's not known yet what they're going to require that you turn in. One would assume this is simpler than a 3-minute film, which you need to do for the idling. This would be more in the moment, I would think, so. It will be interesting. And if you go on to the end.
I had another question. Just
yeah,
like,
please do.
Like if it's a painted pedestrian island, you know, surrounded with the delineators, does that count as a sidewalk?
I don't know. Let me see who's here. No, Jennifer Leung's not here anymore. And why is Brittany in as an attendee?
Oh, I think she needs to
she had to
sign in
reconnect
every once in a while, and I have to go back and make her a panelist.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry, my connection's been really
by
bad.
my read, it doesn't appear that a center island, if it doesn't serve some sort of sidewalk purpose, would count it in that.
Yeah, that would be interesting. If you go to the last one, because I have a couple of points that I would like to have added. And that's why I give some suggested resolves, and it's mostly because, well, 2 reasons. One, I needed some technical eyes looking at this because we're dealing with, am I using the right direction, such as where I am in the city codes and things to work out the actual wording of these resolutions, but also because I wanted to make clear that 2 things that I'd like to see changed and get feedback from people. I would like city council to amend that law to add no standing zones, loading zones, and blocking sidewalk ramps or curb cuts as reportable locations where parking creates hazardous obstruction that endangers safety. Those are their words in the law that I took, the creating hazardous obstruction that endangers safety. And so I looked to put together whereases. Was it possible to do that? And I think that's pretty straightforward. And I heard that come up in Michael's discussion. Many people complaining about when cars park in standing zones, such as in front of buildings. When I know River Terrace here was marked out to be no standing, was so that emergency vehicles, especially hook and ladder fire trucks, had an adequate turning radius to be able to get into the street. So there are reasons why they became no standing that relate to a safety issue. Other places, They force double parking when you have people in them because they're not meant to be filled. So I think it could be defended as being in the same spirit as the law, hence asking those things to be considered. And that would be great relief to us as a district to add those, which Lucian and I came up with. Where else would we want them to be that might work with the law? And also to do that, and this is the technical part that I needed Lucian to look at, that the Department of Transportation would have to amend the placard parking regulations, I give where it is, so that it's not permissible to park with a placard in truck loading or unloading zones, because that's legal to them, or to block any portion of a sidewalk ramp with a placard. Because right now, those are things that the DOT does allow in their regulations. So I want to change those as well. So I'm going to ask Tammy, comment, question? And then Mariama. But Tammy, you muted?
Sorry, trying to make dinner and listen at the same time with kids is I apologize. My question is, I'm 100% up to support this, but I have a question. By adding no standing zones, right?
Yes.
Loading zones, I have no issues with curb cuts, you know that. That's annoying as all get out. Is there a reason that it has been allowed or permissible that we're not thinking of? Or has it just been a blatant disregard? You understand? Like, is there a reason that they've allowed other than opportunity?
Yeah, no, I think some of these things are kind of lawsuits waiting to happen. For instance, the fact that United Spinal started the lawsuit that they won for hundreds of millions of dollars to put in curb cuts, they still didn't change some of the regulations of the DOT to then turn around and say, well, they didn't, this was just predates it. Say, yeah, you can park in front of them if you want. How can you be found guilty in a lawsuit saying you better put them in because those are the rights under the ADA, but it's okay if it blocks them and they're not usable? It makes no sense. So I think this is another historical glitch that's in there.
Well, Betty, if I may, I think it's an astute question. When kind of we're used to seeing all these vehicles when they're at home base. Any kind of inspector enforcement authority that's departing from, DOB Central or any other kind of agency to go, to another borough, uptown, where have you, they are, in a perfect world, using this vehicle to go to some place that is hopefully far from transit, and I believe that them allowing them to park in some of those areas just kind of speaks to their needing to get reasonably close so they can proceed on foot, do what they have to do, and return back. It doesn't make sense for them to do that where the car is parked most of the time and it is left, and that's really I think the issue. When they're doing an inspection, they're not spending. I don't believe they'll be spending, 8 hours on location at that site. They'll be going, making an inspection, finding they have access or not, and then returning back. And then that placard, then those same regulations are then, abused for an 8-hour period when they go home and there's only so many inspectors overnight. So I think that there needs to be some nuance, at least, to say, well, if we agree that they should be able to park in a loading zone if they are, a mile away from the main office, borough office, or something like that. But if they're within walking distance, if they're in CB1, it really shouldn't be. There should be a place for the vehicle to be parked, and not where other people ought to be using a facility that's been designed to do something else all day long, like a loading zone or a cross or a curb cut. And I think that's where the rub is that we're seeing everything at the origin, whereas these regulations or permissions are really designed for the destination. That's my guess.
Well, and they were assumed for other things, such as it specifically says for non-commutational purposes. Yet, as we know, many of the placard uses, especially in Battery Park City, are specifically for commutation. They're there all day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea behind placard has been obviously abused beyond all belief. The idea that, you know, a vehicle, if it's in the service of the greater city interest, you know, is being used to get someone to a site for an important reason and then return back. You know, that's the whole idea of the placard. And then it's been, of course, you know, abused to be essentially a way to get free parking for whatever reason and create distorted incentives of how people get downtown. But just in the purest sense, the ability to park in those areas, while I don't believe is, you know, the highest and best use for those areas, at least should have more nuance of, you know, where they're taking their vehicle versus what they're doing with it and how they're abusing it in our district and a lot of other places in Manhattan that have the headquarters for many of these city agencies.
Are you suggesting to nuance the third resolve or second, or whatever?
No.
Because I would argue sidewalk ramp, it is absolutely never acceptable. And one of my main complaints is at the end of my block, as I want to go across Chambers Street, there's always somebody parked there who's a school teacher at Stuyvesant High School, and they had just pulled in there. And I can't get across the street because that's the only place I can get on the sidewalk.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a good reason to block a sidewalk ramp. And I think that the problem here is in the legislation that's being proposed, it says, you know, it makes it clear it adds crosswalks. The problem is that DOT does not always map crosswalks to the street.
Correct.
Where people are, and that's yeah, and I think that's a gap. But I'm only presenting that because, you know, Tammy's question was, I wonder why originally this existed, and I just believe that maybe in a you know, very innocent way, the intent of the placard, which is how they're used at all effectively, in a large sense, the intent was that they deliver a city employee to do some sort of function and then return and vacate that space, not leave their personal automobile there, and that's the abuse. So, you know, I'm not saying to nuance it. I'm trying to think through maybe what the original intent was.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to clarify you weren't giving me suggestions about changing the resolves, which is part of the question. And Mariana,
just get a for-hire vehicle to deliver the person. You know, they should take a taxi or an Uber there and then back. And I think that's a better use of city funds than having a vehicle that just sits there and does nothing for most of the day.
Mariana?
Yeah, it seems not to allow parents opportunity to pick up or drop off their kids by car unless I'm reading it incorrectly. Is that right? You can't be like near a school?
No, you can't park.
I thought it said like no stopping, no whatever, and that would prohibit parents from picking up and dropping off their children, if I read it properly. Yeah, it says shall park, stop, or stand.
If it's in a bus lane or a bicycle lane, in front of a crosswalk, across a crosswalk, on the sidewalk, in front of a fire hydrant. Now, we all know realistically, a lot of these things, momentarily, no one's going to come in and enforce it. Citizens are more likely to than police, that's true. But no, they make them very specific things where you can't do it.
I would recommend.
Yeah, I'm having trouble thinking about, picturing if there's any like bike lanes right in front of a school or anything like that. I mean, I think most people make an effort to not park, at least I would hope so, to not park by the ramps or in the crosswalk, but you may need to pull over quickly to let your child out or in, and then that may be in a bike lane if there's one immediately adjacent to the school, and that could be problematic.
You may need to go somewhere else, like on the other side of the street or on the next block. Or
Mariama, what the legislation doesn't prohibit or doesn't allow people to issue fines is if someone just double parks in the actual travel lane. So if a person is dropping off or picking up someone and they're standing in their vehicle, if they do so just the lane and not half the travel lane and the bike lane, it doesn't allow someone to drop the dime, so to speak. So,
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
For that clarification.
Yeah, we're just changing behaviors, but
yeah, well, people will adapt.
No question. That's what's good about humans. Any other comments before, moving to take a vote? I will take that as a no. Can I get a motion to end discussion and take a vote?
Yeah, you've got a motion to call the question.
Second?
I second it.
Thank you, Detta. Then let's get everyone, again, I would assume a yes unless you vote one of the other categories. So for all of those against this resolution, thank you. And also name and then your vote if you abstain on this resolution. And finally, any recusals? Then it passes unanimously.
Okay. I didn't know if I missed an oppose, but okay, unanimous. I got it.
Yeah, that made it simple. And I think that might be the last slide, but I wanted to remind people of.
Yep,
Yes,
that's it.
There's the last slide. Just in case people haven't seen the news, but it's kind of been all over the place. The MTA has announced they don't, in their budget, they do not think congestion pricing will occur before 2023. Again, with the change of mayor coming in 2022, things could change a bit. It was kind of interesting. It was also in city and state that when Governor Cuomo spoke with President-elect Biden about New York and what they wanted from this administration that's coming in, he did not mention congestion pricing or the barrier that the federal government has created regarding that. He spoke about other things, but not congestion pricing. So you should know what the MTA has said in their budget. They're projecting not until 2023. The governor wasn't concerned enough to mention it to President-elect Biden. And so it will come up in the future, but you'll see why it's not on my immediate radar because we don't really even have a time frame at this point. I hope that's good news to all of you. And Tammy, if you'd like to speak, and then Mariama.
I think, Betty, it gives us an opportune time to really work hard with your committee in the next 3 years to reinvent how our streets are, even if we have to go street by street, as was said to CB2, to really make a strong effort to work on our landscape, seeing what we can change to reclaim for some greater public use, seeing what advantages we can do to make positive change before congestion pricing comes back on the docket as a solid conversation, because it is heated, it is controversial. No one wants to pay any more money for any reason if you're living downtown. So let's just try and see what we can do to make bicyclists safer, to make street opportunities more prevalent for the people who live here, and support the businesses. I know the garages aren't small businesses necessarily, but there's lots of places for people to park into these days if you're coming to work in Lower Manhattan.
I agree. And thank you for because I think that's the importance of Michael's discussion, is to try to get some of the priorities of the wider community. And we need to get some outreach if it's needed as this gets more finalized, to see that people agree with kind of where we're going for all these shared demands on our streets.
Well, and nobody's ever whatever happened to the idea that if you worked for a company, you know, you could park in one central area and then walk to work from there. Whoever said that you had to have a spot underneath the door of your building? I mean, that works out really nice when you live here 24/7, but for the 8 hours a day that you go to work, perhaps that does not need to be a street parking anymore. Just saying.
Well, yeah, no, I think that's, you could argue that for everything. So that's going to be the juggling act of get things done. So I know, thank you. That's kind of where we're going with this. And I think that the other hands have gone down. So I'm going to.
Yeah, I just say I wholly agree with Tammy. And I think that my guess would be that the state realized what many of us have been saying, that doing it now is not conducive to growth. I walked down Fulton Street the other day, and almost every business on the right side of the street, so the northbound side of the street, was closed. And we've really got to do something about encouraging people to come down here and not, closing ourselves off from the rest of the city.
Yeah, no, thanks. I agree. I think this needs to be a very general consensus, which I'm glad to hear, building our district and the areas around, and we're going to come back very strong. If we ever really went away, I don't think we did. But thank you all. I'll see you next
thanks
week.
everyone. Thanks, Betty.
Thank you, Betty and Michael. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Everyone have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. If you rent a Revel, wear leather gloves.
Thank you for being the
Thanks,
word of
Mimi.
wisdom, Mimi.
Have a great